Okay, so once more and officially welcome to our Bible study on 2 Samuel chapter 20. We thank you, Barbara, for hosting us in her home, and welcome all of those who are online, whether on Zoom or on YouTube, to our study. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your grace, your mercy, and your love in making yourself and your will known to us through your word. We thank you for the revelation of your Son, Jesus Christ, and the life and mortality that you have brought to life, to light for us through him. We pray that as we study your word, you would instruct us in your will, warn us and guard us against all evil, lead us into a deeper, firmer faith in all your promises, which are ours in Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so David has been restored to Jerusalem as king. Absalom is dead. David has pardoned his enemies. There's been a conflict between the men of Israel and men of Judah over David's return to Jerusalem. And the men of Judah have more or less shouted down the representatives of the rest of Israel and insisted on their right to bring David back to Jerusalem, lead the triumphal procession, take the place of honor. And David himself is complicit in this because in an attempt, it seems, to shore up support for himself, he goes to those whom he trusts most, which is his tribesmen, his kinsmen in the tribe of Judah, and he invites them essentially to accompany him to Jerusalem, which causes friction with the other tribes and a disagreement and a division between them and Judah, which is not a new division. It's been there for a while. It's an old one, but it's now exacerbated. It's made worse first by the actions of David, and then especially by the actions of the men of Judah, who at this point, if like they lose the fight and the argument, and instead of the kingdom being more firmly united behind David, it is in fact more deeply divided on account of David. So the seeds of future problems are being sown here. And what happens now next is a direct consequence of the events in the previous chapter. Let's read about it first. So just the first 3 verses to begin with. Somebody would like to read.
Shall I? Now there happened to be there a worthless man, whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichi, a Benjamite. And he blew the trumpet and said, "We have no portion in David. We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents of Israel." So all the men of Israel withdrew from David and followed Sheba, the son of Bichi. But the men of Judah followed their king steadfastly from the Jordan to Jerusalem.
One more.
And David came to his house at Jerusalem, and the king took the 10 concubines whom he had left to care for in the house and put them in a house under guard and provided for them, but did not go into them. So they were shut up until the day of their death, living as if in widowhood.
Thank you. Okay, so 2 things happened there. You got these rebellion of Sheba, and then David's dealings with his concubines, which are 2 separate things, but it's such a short passage that I thought we'd read them all at once. So we've got this man, Sheba, the son of Bichri. He says he's a Benjaminite. Later on, he's identified as being a man of Ephraim. So we don't really know very much. Well, we don't really know anything about him, who he is, where he comes from, who this Bichri is, whether that's a reference to his actual father, whether he is a member of a clan by that name, because we have later on reference to other Bichrites. But given that Judah has prevailed over Israel in the dispute over who kind of gets to acclaim David as their king, instead of the country, the nation and the people being united behind David, Judah claimed precedence over the rest of Israel, and now Sheba, who presumably had been there at that last dispute, called the men of Israel away from David. We have no portion in David, and we have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents, O Israel. And the fact that he blows the trumpet, that's like a summons to the whole nation. So he's not directly saying, I'm now the king of Israel, but he is clearly taking charge. And if he's of the tribe of Benjamin, then he is indeed of the tribe of Saul. So the old wounds are being opened here, and we're told all the men of Israel. Now that doesn't mean every single person in Israel. It's more likely that's a reference to all the men of Israel gathered there. So in that particular gathering, the representatives of Israel, and they leave, and so Judah gets to follow David from Jordan to Jerusalem as they insisted, but at a loss of the loyalty of the other representatives. And
does
so
it mean every man to his tents?
let's
Mean
go
they're
home.
living in tents or just?
No, it's the saying means let's just go home. We're not going to stay here.
Right.
Yeah. And so we have the next crisis, and the final crisis of David's kingship at this point, where he himself is at least partly to blame. And it's all still, as I keep saying, I keep using the phrase week after week, but the sin of David, the original crisis that David precipitated by, that started off with his affair, it wasn't an affair, was it? His adultery with and the rape of Bathsheba, cascading, and the cancer of the sin spreading. Here is his latest manifestation. And so the rest of this chapter, except for the next verse, deals with the outcome of Sheba's rebellion and see how it works out and how it's dealt with. Now, the other thing to remember is that in the previous chapter, David had demoted Joab, his nephew, who had been the commander of the armies, and instead gave the command of the armies to Amasa, who was Absalom's commander-in-chief. And we've seen before, I think David, a few weeks ago, you referred to him as a ruffian or a rogue or some word of that description, I recall. He's been very, very effective and very capable, but he has taken things into his own hands. He has overruled David, been insubordinate, not in order to rebel against David, but if you like, to act in David's interests over against David's direct commands. And most recently, and probably the cause of his demotion, he killed Absalom, contrary to the direct instructions of David. I'm going to direct and public instructions of David to spare Absalom. It was probably in David's interest for Absalom to die, but it was not what David wanted. And then when David understandably wept over Absalom, Joab reprimanded him and made him act or to come out of mourning and publicly to present himself. And again, Joab was almost certainly, politically speaking, he was right. He did the right thing. He was in David's interest, but nevertheless, he acted against David, the king. And so that David should have demoted Joab is therefore not at all surprising. And the election of Amasa, which the picking of Amasa as the commander-in-chief in his place was politically very shrewd, because Amasa had been on the side of the rebellion. So in so doing, he's acting, if you like, to shore up broader support. So he's not just rewarding those who are loyal, but he's also embracing his enemies, which is if you're looking for some silver linings here in this kind of series of calamities, is the idea that the king should deal kindly with his enemies, is one of those Christ-like things that we find in David throughout his life. So that's setting the scene for what's about to happen. Then we get this little sort of sidestep or a footnote in verse 3 of David arriving in Jerusalem and putting his things in order. And the one thing we are told that he deals with those concubines. You will remember that when David left Jerusalem, when Absalom was approaching Jerusalem, David flees Jerusalem, but he left 10 concubines behind as housekeepers to look after the palace, to look after his house. And Absalom, on arriving in Jerusalem, asserts his authority and kind of displays his authority and his complete humiliation of David by taking those 10 concubines one by one, and he erects a tent on the roof of David's house, so like in public view, and then he takes each of those concubines one at a time and sleeps with them, and in that way he publicly shames David by demonstrating that he has now taken over his household and can do what he likes. Of course, that's a grave sin, and according to the law of Moses, that alone was sufficient sin to warrant Absalom's death. Mm. But now David returns, and he comes back, and there are these concubines, and what is he to do with them? And so this is what he does. He takes them and he places them, essentially places them in a house. This is under guard. So this is into a secure home, a secure house, and he provides for them, but no longer has any intimacy with them, and so they live as widows. And in this way, David is in fact is being law-abiding. That if you look in Leviticus 18, which there's a chapter about unlawful sexual relations, and this includes verse 14. Verse 15. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You shall not uncover her nakedness. And earlier in verse 8, it said, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness. In other words, it is unlawful to have sexual relations with your father's wife. Absalom has been guilty of that. And but by doing this, Absalom has taken these women as his concubines, de facto. And now what David does is treats them as such, and no longer has any sexual relations with them, because they have been, in essence, they have been defiled by Absalom. And it's a really good example of something that we see again and again and again, not only in the Bible, but also in the history of of almost any community or society, is the way that human sin leaves helpless victims behind it. Mm. These women have done nothing wrong. They're not at fault. They are victims of Absalom's sin, and indirectly they are victims of David's sins, which have brought them the situation. They have been violated, and that they're violated, they cannot be undone. And so their victimhood, if you like to use that terrible word, their victimhood becomes permanent through no fault of their own. And this is, of course, what happens all the time in the world, that the weak are oppressed by the strong, and the sins of the strong leave victims particularly low, women with low, either low status or otherwise in a position of weakness, leave them permanently damaged and their lives permanently marked. So they are living, their husband is alive, but they live as widows.
Doesn't say that they had any children.
It doesn't.
No, that's what I was just about to say. If they had children, do they stand back, or if they, are waiting for the child to come out? I don't know.
We know nothing about that at all.
Yeah, but
I mean,
that's what the whole thing is about, isn't it?
It's not about children at this point. It's about power.
Yeah.
And the whole thing was in Absalom was a kind of demonstration of his complete control over David's house. So he even takes his father's concubines and treats them as his own. So all we know is that they live as if they were widows. In other words, they live in this in a state of isolation for the rest of their lives, which is truly tragic.
Mm.
Being concubines, their children were, whatever children they may or may not have had, would not have been heirs. They wouldn't have been treated as princes or princesses. They were sort of, concubines were lower status spouses, and their children were of lower status as well.
Mm.
And of course, if we wanted to go down that way, we could have a whole discussion about the way in which the holy institution of marriage has been sort of degraded by this practice of concubinage in the first place.
Mm.
Scripture is very, very clear. God's intention, God's will, God's gift of marriage was that a man should take a woman, and the two shall become one flesh. And the very fact that you have multiple wives, that you have concubines, is a distortion and a corruption of the institution of matrimony, of marriage in the first place. And the moment that happens, if David had had one wife, the situation would have been very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that he has a small harem makes David would never have left his wife. Let's say he'd been just Michal or just Abigail. He would never have left her behind to look after the house while he runs away from Absalom. But now he's got these spare concubines, and he treats them shabbily by leaving them in danger, because it's convenient for him, and it's an expression of hope. I'll be back. But of course leaves them completely defenseless and vulnerable, and they will suffer for the rest of their life. And there is no way, there's nothing.
And their children.
No way wrong. If they are children, we don't know about any children. Yeah.
There's always been a question mark here in my head when God says all the time about David that he was a king, or he was a man who did always his will, and still we know all these things. So how do you explain that? He's like as if he had been blameless, and then he wasn't.
I think that what that refers to, that's always given within a particular context, and that context, the wider context of this whole history, that begins really in the book of Joshua and runs all the way to the end of 2 Kings and beyond to Ezra and Nehemiah, is Israel as God's people and Israel's worship of God. And so it's a particular, it's kind of main focus there is not David's, if you like, personal blamelessness in his all his conduct, but rather as king, as leading God's people, and it's most what it refers to above all is that there was never any kind of idolatry, any kind of leading of people astray from following God during David's kingship. That's the main purpose of it, or kind of the main or the key point about that expression, and the fact that David was nevertheless fallible and would sin in his, like all, you know, as far you reminds everyone we all sin, and David did, and because he held a public position which with power, his sins were very evident in a way that, you know, people in our position would never have the opportunity to sin quite so publicly, just because our lives are not very public. And so I think that's the key point. Does that make sense? Yeah. So there we hear no more of this. The verse 3 is, it kind of stands on its own as it's a sort of David's arriving in Jerusalem. This is the first thing that he does. We pick up at the very end of the chapter the other changes, or the other arrangements that David makes after his restoration to the throne. But in the meantime, before we hear that, we've got the whole situation with Sheba and his rebellion, and the danger that this poses. I mean, David has only just managed to regain the throne, and now it looks like it's slipping away straight away. First, his son rebelled against him, and as soon as that rebellion is put down, now here's a new rebellion. And so what do we have? We have David stepping into action, into the situation, and he takes action straight away. Could we read verses 4 to 10?
I'll do that, Taphany.
Thank you.
And the king said to Amasa, assemble the men of Judah for me within 3 days, and be present here yourself. So Amasa went to assemble the men of Judah, but he delayed longer than the set time which David had appointed him. And David said to Abishai, now Sheba the son of Bichri will do us more harm than Absalom. Take your lord's servants and pursue him, lest he find for himself fortified cities and escape us. So Joab's men with the Cherethites, the Pelethites, and all the mighty men went out after him. And they went out of Jerusalem to pursue Sheba the son of Bichri. When they were at the large stone, which is in Gibeon, Amasa came before them. Now Joab was dressed in battle armor. On it was a belt with a sword fastened to its sheath at his hips. And as he was going forward, it fell out. Then Joab said to Amasa, are you in health, my brother? And Joab took Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him. But Amasa did not notice that the sword that was in Joab's hand, and he struck him with it in the stomach, and his entrails poured out on the ground. And he did not strike him again. Thus he died. Then Joab and Abishai, his brother, pursued Sheba to the son of Bichri.
Okay, thank you. So the very last sentence, we'll pick up that later on. So here's the so Amasa is the new commander-in-chief, and he is sent by David to gather an army. Remember, standing armies were not really a thing in those days. Armies would be assembled as and when. I mean, Britain did not have a standing army until very recently. Most of the time you went to war and you had to kind of raise an army, raise taxes and then raise an army and then off you go. So standing armies were not you wouldn't have lots of garrisons with professional soldiers or permanent soldiers in them. And so Amasa goes to summon Judah. So you see what's happening again. So Israel has separated from Judah, and so the idea is to go and summon Judah into arms and to go and, if you like, forcibly bring all of Israel under control. And here again we see, on the one hand, the fragmentation, David accepting the reality of the fragmentation of the kingdom. So instead of doing what modern politicians sometimes call a kind of a hearts and minds campaign, go and try and win over the people of Israel by persuasion, he's going to subjugate them, or bring them under control by force. Which on the one hand is you could say, well, this is a little bit like, this is a little bit like Jesus, kind of, and the Lion of Judah, son of David, and he brings all things are brought under his feet, given under his feet. That's a kind of a positive way of reading it, but on the other hand, from the point of view, the reality, or day-to-day reality of the kingdom of Israel, obviously is not great. You would want people's hearts to, the people of Israel's hearts to be fastened to David, rather than them simply being under forcible control. And this, the use of force as to keep Israel unified, will come to bite not David and not Solomon, but Solomon's son Rehoboam. When basically the Israel no longer believe in the use of force. In other words, they no longer fear the force. They don't think that they don't feel that they are at any risk if they walk away from it, and so they walk away from it successfully. So the same problem continues. But he sends Amasa to do this, and he sets a very clear deadline: 3 days, and then we need you back in 3 days. And off he goes, but he doesn't come back in time. Now, why might Amasa? You're David, you're sitting in Jerusalem, you're waiting for this army to come, and they need to act quickly, because if they don't act quickly, the other side will mobilize, as David says. Sheba will do us more harm than Absalom. Take your Lord's servants, pursue him, lest he gets himself to fortified cities and escape from us. In other words, if he manages to establish himself somewhere secure, then we'll be in trouble, because now there's no way that we can counteract. You have to be quick while he's still on the move, while he's still out in the open. So Amasa hasn't come back. Options. Why might he not have come back? We're not told. We never find out. What might it look like?
He's run away. Decided not to be with David after all.
Okay, so he might just be disloyal, and he's kind of scarpered off, and he's not coming back. Melted away. Other possible options.
It takes time to gather an army, and 3 days is very short time to go around all of Judah, or whatever part of Israel is still with David. So it's a time thing.
Yeah, it is difficult, and of course Amasa will be. He's almost certainly not very experienced. Joab's been doing this sort of thing for ages. Amasa is new to the job. He'd been with Absalom for a short time, and now he's been with David for 2 minutes, and perhaps he's just not very good at it yet. And he fails to do what he's been taught to do. Any other possibilities?
You had second thoughts about the whole thing?
Yeah, but so where is he now?
Holding up somewhere so he won't be found?
Yeah, so this is the kind of he's slipped off kind of theory.
Or maybe he found that no one wanted to be behind him, or do as he said.
So he might have been unsuccessful in his task, because we never find out whether or not he had any soldiers in tow with him. When he does come back, we're not told that he came with a great throng of men. Of course, it might have looked like that. He's actually defected. There's this rebellion. He's rebelled once already. He's joined one rebellion. Maybe he's joined another. Either way, he is not there within 3 days. And I am not a very experienced military commander, but I would suggest that if you have sent on an errand and you're told to be back by a certain time, being back by a certain time is the priority. If you come back in 3 days and say, I only found 2 men and a dog, at least your loyalty is not in question, because you did your best, and at least you're back there, you're presenting. And of course, there are no telephones, no telegrams, no postal service. You can't be sending a message saying, you know what, can I have an extra 24 hours because, or I got stuck because there's lots of traffic in Hebron or something. So he's got no way of communicating, and therefore being there on time is is very important, and being delayed ends up being his demise. Because David, after 3 days, he decides that Amasa can't be relied on. He has failed, and so he calls Abishai. Who's Abishai?
Is it Joab's brother?
It is Joab's brother, very good. The Joab's brother, who has distinguished himself more than once in action so far, and he's not Joab. So Joab is still in the doghouse.
Mm.
And so he sends Abishai to take your Lord's servant, in other words, the soldiers that are there. So forget this gathering of troops, take whom you can find, take the people who are already here and pursue him before it's too late. And he goes with Joab's men, so the people who kind of immediately attach to Joab, the Kerethites and the Pelethites. These are the mercenaries. We don't know much about them. We've heard about them a few times. Some mercenary troops, possibly Philistine mercenaries, and all the mighty men, whoever they are. So kind of men of valor, the elite troops. So there is this small. It's a bit like you might have, you might have the kind of, the Vatican. You've got the Swiss Guard. They're the kind of the men who are there all the time. So he gathers the top troops without a mass army. So Amasa has been sent to gather a mass army. He doesn't have one, so he just has the elite troops in Jerusalem, and they go out from Jerusalem to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. And when they were at the great stone that is in Gibeon, what great stone that is in Gibeon? The one that they know about, the one that the author of 2 Samuel is really aware of and assumes that all his readers know where that is. We don't know about it anymore, but clearly there's some sort of great landmark that's obvious. They come across Amasa. So Amasa is on his way home, but he's late. He's missed the bus. Now we're told, and this is how it ends, Joab was there. All of a sudden we find Joab again. And he does what Joab does. So he's wearing his military garment, and over the garment he's got a belt with a sword in his sheath fastened on his thigh. And as he went forward, it fell out. Now, why did it fall out, I wonder? And this is Joab.
In order for him to pick it up to kill later.
It's very suspicious, isn't it?
Mm.
It's a bit like you're being on parade somewhere and your rifle drops to the ground. It happens, it shouldn't, and if you are Joab, if you are the kind of the most able fighter in the troop, if you're dropping your rifle, you're probably dropping your rifle.
Mm.
So it fell out. Whoops. And we have a pretty good idea of that this is not an accident from what happens, because Joab, his sword drops to the ground. Joab greets Amasa with a friendly greeting. Is it well with you, my brother, or how are you, or literary translations? He says, are things at peace with you? Literally. And Joab took Amasa by the beard, which is apparently, I'm told that it's a typical thing to do with someone who you treat as a kinsman. You kind of, as show sort of affection, you kind of kiss people by his right hand. We're told specifically that he used his right hand to do that. Why are we told that?
Because he's with them.
No, because the right hand is the one that you use to do everything.
Yeah.
Left hand is the weaker hand, is the one that is not used for anything significant. And therefore,
there's no left-handed people in that time.
They have always been left-handed people.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yes. Yeah.
And he was hiding that he had a sword.
Exactly. So his active strong hand was engaged in this act of friendship, and therefore his left hand, picking up the sword, was undetected. It says Amasa did not observe the sword. It's like he wasn't paying attention. Is maybe a better way of translating it. He wasn't. The word that is translated in the ESV as observe, and the NIV more accurately translated not on his guard. It means to guard or to protect or to things like that. So he wasn't going to pay any attention to it. He didn't think anything of it. The other hand, and so Joab completely, it didn't defend himself, and Joab was able surreptitiously to pick up the sword and stabbed Amasa in the stomach, and so spilled his entrails to the ground without striking, so with a single blow. And says, and he died. But as we discover in just a moment, not there and then, not immediately. So he was again, Joab acted without any instructions. He had decided that Amasa was a liability that must be got rid of. It was not good for David to have Amasa as the commander or some such thing, and so he does this. And what he did.
Doesn't it also? Sorry.
Go on.
Doesn't it also show that Amasa came without these troops? Because if there would have been all these troops of this Judah soldiers, this couldn't have happened. So it sort of shows that he came alone or something.
We're simply not told. And the fact that there isn't, it doesn't say Amasa came, with 100,000 men. I think we probably would have been told. The fact that he comes, we can make of it what we want. I mean, we never find out. We never got his side of the story, so we never find out precisely what exactly has gone wrong. He has failed one way or another. He's failed in his task. Whether he deserved to die for it is another matter. Whether he deserved to be sacked, demoted, and maybe kept under guard, kept under close eye for future reference is another matter. Joab doesn't wait. He acts, and he acts, if I quote David again, as a ruffian. He's a man of violence. If I may give away future events, David doesn't deal with Joab at this point. He probably needs him too much. But as he's dying, he leaves instructions for Solomon, and one of the instructions is that you mete out justice to Joab. Because Joab by this time has shed a lot of blood, and a lot of it has been on his own initiative. He has killed Abner, he has killed Absalom, and has killed Amasa, all on his own initiative, and he doesn't have the authority to do so. And yeah, it will come back on him. And then all of a sudden, we're told Joab and Abishai, his brother, pursued Sheba. That's not big. So Joab has basically climbed back onto the horse. He's taking charge again. Nobody's appointed him. He appoints himself, and he takes over. Got to feel for Abishai a little bit. Any thoughts about that? About that particular episode?
I don't think I'd say Joab is a ruffian. I think he's a thug.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said the word you used.
No. I'm just no. I probably said that before, but I'm increasing my volume to thug. And I just wonder, that thing at the end when David was dying, saying not to let Joab live. Maybe it was also to protect Solomon, because this seems to be Joab seems to be a bit of a rogue out in his own, and maybe David was concerned that he could possibly kill or injure Solomon in some way.
Clearly, he was not a healthy influence in that sense. He was a volatile person. very clearly. And so, yeah, I would have thought so. But even if he wasn't a threat to Solomon as such, or a potentially unstable element in Solomon's court, he needed, there was, you could say, the justice required that he be dealt with eventually.
It'd be also just thinking about modern day church. There's Joab in leadership. I wouldn't like to have a leader like Joab in a church ministry team, or if you were the pastor and he was your treasurer, or something like that. Very dangerous man. I wouldn't have him on the welcoming committee.
No, and I mean, politicians through the ages have had people who do their dirty work for them, and there shouldn't be any such dirty work, certainly in God's kingdom. And the thing is, it's a bit like I remember having a discussion very, very many years ago with somebody who was watching them wash. I think it was a non-stick pan, and it was being scrubbed quite hard with a scourer. I pointed out that this might not be very good for the long-term prospects of this non-stick pan. And the person said basically it takes so long otherwise to get it off. It's such hard work. So I suggested that maybe they should use sandpaper. That's even quicker. If you really want to get things clean, sandpaper, sandblast if necessary. It definitely comes off quickly. Point being that to do things well and right is often the slow and patient option. But if you don't do them right, you might get to your desired outcome, but the cost is unacceptable.
And there was a very clear law already given by God to the country, so that they should have been obeying it. Especially there when you're talking about those who were in power.
Yes, and the whole thing is I mean the old saying is we talk about means and ends. Do the ends justify the means? And the answer, of course, is no. Ends don't justify the means. Paul writes about this in Romans 12. Let us do evil that good may come. No, that is not acceptable. Even whatever you're I sometimes, as you know, I've got a terrible habit of saying things that are designed to upset and shock. So one of those is that I think good intentions are overrated. I'm not as interested in your intentions as I am in your actual actions. And God too God does not say to us, do whatever it takes to get to X or Y outcome. No, he says, here is truth, here is falsehood, here is right and here is wrong. Do these, don't do those. And when we live in a fallen and corrupt world, it's often a very unsatisfactory, from a kind of results point of view, an unsatisfactory way of going about things. But if you don't do things right, you will break things on the way. God gives us these things for a reason. I mean, there's so many. One could give so many examples from the world around us. If I just take one historical example, why is Northwestern Europe and North America, why are they so wealthy? And Australia, I suppose, and New Zealand. And one answer to that question is because Britain got really, really wealthy. And that wealth then spread, and the technology that was developed in Britain, the Industrial Revolution, spread to other countries, enabled them to become wealthy too. So Germany, for example, did what Britain did, but much faster and ultimately more effective than Britain had done 100 years later. Well, what did Britain get so wealthy? Why did so many things happen here and not in other countries? Well, one reason is, one explanation for that is the enclosure of common land. The enclosures that took place in the 1700s and in particular, where rural communities that had done strip farming with shared land, strips of land, all of a sudden lost their common rights to common land, and lands were enclosed and they became privately owned. Now, what that led to was, from a positive point of view, an accumulation of wealth. And you got these landowners who accumulated an enormous amount of wealth, which they then invested, and that investment then led to the Industrial Revolution. And hey presto, today we live in great comfort. Even the poor live more comfortably. Most poor people live more comfortably than a lot of the vast majority of people ever live. So that's a good thing, right? But what were the short-term consequences of this? Great, it led to the immiseration for about 100 years of poor rural communities. People lost their livelihoods, and those people who used to be able to farm, not very wealthy at all, but they farmed most of their own goods, now all of a sudden were landless. And they end up being the urban working classes. They migrated to the cities and worked in the cotton mills and the factories and the mines and so on, which became the source of wealth. But for several generations, it was paid for by the sweat and blood of people living in miserable conditions. Now, we who are benefiting from it all said, well, it was worth it. But if you drop yourself into, I don't know, Oldham in 1825 and walk into one of the slums and said, in 200 years' time, people are going to be really, really pleased with the results of your labor. Does that make you happy? I'm not sure that they will necessarily give you a second cup of tea. Now, I'm sorry, it's a bit of a long example, but it's just one example out of countless examples we can give, where you can say, well, it was all right in the end.
The Australians and what do they have? They've all pushed them out anyhow.
The Aborigines.
Aborigines.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lots of
Or
them.
the kind of
Yeah.
virtual genocide of the native people of North America as well.
Yeah, some of them are okay, and
Yeah, but the overall process was
that's
terrible.
right, but, yeah.
Yeah, and one reason why America became wealthy is that they treated the native population abominably. And that, yeah, and that's what. So, but these are all examples of where we can say, if we start saying we aim for a good outcome, never mind the process, we find that there is nothing but misery and sin and suffering along the way. And I think this is kind of I've become a little bit more expensive than I intended to do, but since you are bold, David, I felt I had to bat. That we need to have. We need to look after truth and justice, and that's a slow way. That nobody became a billionaire overnight by being a nice guy, but actually being a nice guy is more important than being an overnight sensation or being a billionaire at all. And this is kind of God's concern for the powerless, and God's concern for the poor, God's concern for justice is one that we cannot ignore. And since we are so fallible ourselves and so short on wisdom, the wisest of us is a fool compared to the wisdom of God. For us to say, actually, we're going to overrule God on this point because we can see how this is going to work out better if we do, is not only blasphemy, but it's the greatest foolishness there is. Yes, so Job was a thug. We agree. So let's have a look at what happens next. If you go from if you start again with the last sentence of verse 10, and then read. I think we need to read the whole of the rest of the section. So if somebody could read to verse 15, and then somebody else to verse 22. Any volunteers?
I'll do it from verse 10, the last verse from verse 10.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
Then Joab and Abishai, his brother, pursued Sheba, the son of Bichri. Meanwhile, one of Joab's men stood near Amasa and said, "Whoever favors Joab and whoever is for David, follow Joab." But Amasa wallowed in his blood in the middle of the highway. And when the man saw that all the people stood still, he moved Amasa from the highway to the field and threw a garment over him. When he saw that everyone who came upon him halted, when he was removed from the highway, all the people went on after Joab to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. And he went through all the tribes of Israel to Abel and Beth Makkah and all the Beerites. So they gathered together and also went after Sheba. Then they came and besieged him in Abel of Beth Makkah, and they cast up a siege mound against the city, and it stood by the rampart. And all the people who were with Joab battered the wall to throw it down.
Thank you. Well, let's stop there since we asked and look at so this is mostly a kind of just a narrative of what happens next, and here we see that when he said that Joab killed Amasa, he didn't die instantly. So the poor chap is sort of dying slowly on the road, and one of Joab's young men, so one of the men soldiers in Joab's retinue, kind of takes his stand and calls everybody to follow Joab and associate loyalty to David with loyalty to Joab. So this is a kind of it's really an act of insubordination, because David has originally appointed Amasa. Then he sent Abishai on a particular mission. Now Amasa, who is David's commander, has been murdered by Joab, and one of Joab's own men basically calls the soldiers to disregard both the chain of command and David's explicit instructions, and for people to come and follow Joab. So it's a kind of it's not a coup because it's not against the king, but it's certainly it's a kind of mutiny within the ranks, and David and Joab is kind of promoted back to his position in the field by one of his own subordinates. So it's a pretty messy, militarily speaking, it's a pretty messy situation. But he's standing by Amasa, and there you can see this young man calling everybody follow me, and next to his foot is this man sort of writhing at death's door, with his guts on the road and blood pouring out.
Sounds good.
It's not nice at all. And funnily enough, said anyone who came by saw this and stopped like that. They clearly hesitated. This was not a savory scene. And so what did they do? They carry him away and covered him so he's not a distraction. Amasa, even in his dying, is distracting them. It's just horrible. This thing is really. This reminds me an awful lot of the book of Judges, which begins in the book of Judges, which begins with the death of Joshua, who, like David, was a great warrior and leader of the people, and he calls them at his death. He reminds Israel of their status as God's people, and calls them to continued obedience to the Lord. And then you read the book of Judges, and it starts there, and it's this kind of terrible death spiral into greater and greater iniquity in Israel, until God then gives God then sends Samuel the prophet, and establishes a kingdom, which is a kind of restoration. But here we see that David's kingdom, we've got the same sort of spiral going on. Things just getting out of hand, and violence, just like in Book of Judges, violence increases and lawlessness.
It reminds me of the Good Samaritan, And I think this poor man on the side of the road with his blood coming out of his guts, he needs a good Samaritan to come alongside. But he's been wounded badly by a friend and he's been left to die.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
it seems-
go on.
No, it just, as you have said, it just seems gruesome.
It's really gruesome, unpleasant, man. If you made a film of this, it would be an 18.
Yeah.
I still wouldn't want you to watch it. But I mean, medically speaking, he's beyond help. And you know, if Joe was going to kill him, the kind thing would have been to land a second blow, rather than just leave him there. I mean, it's a kind of, so you know, he didn't strike him again. Is actually an indication of his pitilessness. There's no way in those days, in that situation, there's absolutely no way that a man could survive this. And to kill him slowly is crueler and less kind and more unkind than killing him. You know, killing him at all. If you're going to kill someone, be done with it. Be quick. There is one case in the Book of Judges, as it happens, of a similar scenario where where one of the King Eglon, king of the, I'm doing this from memory now, Moabites, who are oppressing Israel, and one of the men of Israel goes, and he's left-handed, and he thrusts a sword into King Eglon's belly. He's a very fat man, we are told, and kind of sword kind of disappeared into his stomach and kills him and thus saves Israel. But this is now intranisa, and this is within Israel. And while this is happening, go on.
Just one question, because it says that there was no need of a other blow because he was dead. So could it be that he was lying there in his blood, but he was dead?
Yeah, that's yeah. This is the Bible you're looking at translates it that way, but it doesn't actually say. It doesn't say that the Hebrew doesn't say that there was no need. It said he died without a second blow.
Okay.
So that's interpreted. It just means that was enough to kill him, as it would be, but yeah, not very swiftly and certainly not painlessly. I would, if you get to choose your own method of death, this is not one I would recommend.
Presumably, if they wanted to be really awful, they would.
Sorry, I'm struggling to hear it.
If they wanted to be really awful, they would leave him there, especially if he couldn't get up and walk, and then the
soldiers.
No. If you leave something outside and
oh, I see. They'd be like animals would come in. Yes, I mean, but he wasn't going to. But yeah, the point isn't that they were trying. Let's see how slowly we can get rid of it. But nevertheless, we can see that the way that this turns out is gruesome. It's pitiless. There's no suggestion that there's that it's an attempt at torture, but it ends up being that way anyway.
Yeah, torturous.
Yeah, so once they removed him, then everything's fine, and the people now went after Job, and they started pursuing Sheba, and he ends up in this place called Abel of Beth Maachah. There's all the Bichrites assembled and followed him, or Berites. It's not really clear who these people are, so it's likely perhaps it's simply a label referring to the people who had ended up following him, because he's everywhere. Every time he's always referred to as Sheba, son of Bichri. So whoever the people, his folks or his troops assembled and followed him, and they came to this place, Abel of Beth Maachah, which was a fortified. Some sort of fortified town, and there they were holed up, and so Joab besieges it and casts his mound up the city and a rampart and begin to batter down the walls. Now, the expected outcome is if they're successful, they will batter down the walls, and once they manage to breach it, they go in and cause mayhem. Now, of course, the problem for the people of this town is that they are now, whether they like it or not, we're not told whether they welcomed him or not, but that's where he ended up, that they are now, their fate is associated with the fate of Sheba. And now that they are on the defensive, it's not looking very good. If you again read the Old Testament, you will find that very often it's not just the rebels who die in these sieges. There's general death and destruction. And so the whole population of that town now is associated with Sheba, and therefore their fate is associated with his fate, which explains the next passage. Rosemary, are you willing to read for us from 16
Yeah.
to 22, please?
Then the wise woman called down from the city, "Listen, listen, tell Joab, come here, that I may speak to you." And he came to her, and the woman said, Are you Joab? He answered, I am. Then she said to him, Listen to the words of your servant. And he answered, I am listening. Then she said, They used to say at former times, Let them ask counsel as able, and they settled the matter. I am one of those who are peaceable and faithful to Israel. You seek to destroy a city that is the mother and island in Israel. Why will you swallow up the heritage of the Lord? Joab answered, Far be it from me, far be it that I should swallow up and destroy. That is not true. But a man of the hill country of Ephraim, called Sheba, the son of Bichri, has lifted up his hand against King David. Give him up alone, and I will withdraw from the city. And the woman said to Joab, Behold, his head shall be thrown to you over the wall. Then the woman went all to the people of wisdom, and they cut off the head of Sheba, the son of Bichri, and threw it out to Joab. So he blew the trumpet, and they dispersed, and the city, every man to his home. And Joab returned to Jerusalem to the king.
Thank you. Okay, so a wise woman. We're not given her name. She's not the only wise woman or effective woman in the Bible. This is reminiscent of an earlier incident in the history of Israel. I mentioned the book of Judges before. I don't know if any of you, anyone can think of parallels to this particular passage.
Jericho. What do you call them? When the Jericho, the men, spies went to Jericho, and there was this Rahab.
Yep. Yeah. So we had Rahab, and who was instrumental in delivering the city to Israel. She, by her wisdom, managed to save herself and her family, but not the whole city. But obviously delivered the desired outcome for Israel by her actions. Any others?
I may not get the name right. It's to do with the tent and the peg. Is it Jane? Jael.
Yes. Yep. Jael, who again, this is in the book of Judges, and with a nifty use of a tent peg, delivers Israel from an enemy. Yeah, this is correct. Very good. So the escaping enemy general hides in her tent, and she drives a tent peg through his temple, and thus Israel gains victory. This is this is when Deborah and Barak are leading Israel. We also have in Book of Judges, also we have in chapter 9, we've got Abimelech, who's one of the sons of Gideon, and he stages a rebellion, and he goes, this is in chapter 9, and we're told that he attacks a city called Thebes, and he and the people go, the people hold themselves up in the tower. Abimelech comes and he seeks to burn the door of the tower with fire so that he can get in. And we're told that a certain woman threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. And that was the end of that particular battle. And they departed. They saw that he was dead, and they departed home. So that was the end of his rebellion. So there are all these sort of we have several incidents like this where they're all violent incidents where there's some kind of battle or war going on, and the actions, either the wise or the swiftly kind of prudent or actions of women save the day in such a way that ultimately, in each case, Israel benefits. And here we have this wise woman also who acts, but there's no violence. There's no millstone, no tent peg. Walls don't fall down. In fact, it's the very opposite. The walls stay intact because, of course, this is happening. This is within Israel, and she appeals to Joab. First of all, by pointing out that this is the kind of draw. I think it's a little bit of a sort of pun or double entendre here, where it said, "I'm in verse 19. I'm one of those who are peaceable and faithful in Israel. You seek to destroy a city that is a mother in Israel," says the woman. She's kind of almost like identifying herself and her wisdom with the kind of maternal position of this city. Now, we don't know really anything much about Abel of Maacah. It doesn't say is the mother in Israel, like the mother city, but a mother in Israel. Possibly a reference to the fact that any fortified town would be a protector of the surrounding villages. So you see, the difference between a town and a village in the Bible is the town is walled and the village is not. And if you are unwalled in any kind of time of war or other danger, the villagers would seek refuge within the walls of the town. And so if you destroy a town, you don't destroy just a town, but you destroy it's a mother to the surrounding area. And you
They
destroy
were
the
outside
protection.
the town, all
The villages would be, yeah.
outside of it.
Oh, they're besieging it.
Because you had to throw the head over a wall. So
Yeah, they're
were-
besieging it. So the town's
Yeah.
inside it. Yeah, so they're surrounding it. Yes.
Right.
Are you saying? Sorry, Tony. Are you saying that the city is a mother in Israel, or is this lady who's speaking? She's representative as a mother in Israel.
I get the feeling that it's both.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sort of a bit of a pun on this idea of motherhood in this woman saying, but of course, the what she appeals to is that this is the very thing that Sheba begins with. Remember, he said, we have no when he starts, we have no inheritance of the son of Jesse. And now this woman is saying to Joab, if you destroy the city, you're destroying the inheritance of Israel. So swallowing up the heritage of the Lord. In other words, we have been given this by God. Would you destroy this heritage? You are fulfilling Sheba's kind of rallying cry. So she's clearly very, she's called a wise woman, and it's not for nothing that she's called a wise woman.
Not that that's wise, really.
Yeah.
They just don't think.
Who doesn't? That's a false accusation. So she makes a very persuasive case, and we don't know anything more about it. But her claim in verse 18, of course, is that this is a kind of place. This is the place where you come for wisdom traditionally. They used to say in former times, let them but ask counsel at Abel, and then settle the matter. We have a bit of a track record in coming out wise judgments, is what she's saying.
She must be fairly old, must she?
I don't know.
It doesn't say, does it?
Doesn't. No, just wise.
Wise woman wouldn't mean that she was older.
No, just means that she was a woman who was wise. That's all it means. Okay. Generally speaking in life, exceptions exist, but generally speaking in life, people grow with wisdom. So wisdom and old and advanced years are often associated with one another. But of course, there are foolish old people and wise young people as well. And so Joab is kind of cornered by her words. Far be it from me, far be it that I should swallow up or destroy. He's not the Joab and Israel and David's quarrel is not with, or Judah's quarrel is not with the city, but with the man. And so she speaks on behalf of the whole community, and they come up with this plan of action. Just the man. They just want Sheba. Give me Sheba, we'll go home. They deliver him, and so Joab goes home. At the end of the rebellion. And you will remember that not just a couple of chapters before, Joab killed Absalom in order to spare, so that there would be no more bloodletting. Was Israel. And now this woman has taken on the same role as Joab once did. And she offers to deliver the son of Bichri in order to put an end to any further destruction. And so they returned. Every man to his home. So that suggests both that the soldiers of Judah go home, but also that the rebels go home. And it doesn't say so, but in effect it acts as a general amnesty. They're not held accountable. So it is only this is a sort of an example of what we hear from the mouth of Caiaphas, who says it's better that one man die for the people that rather than that the whole nation suffer. And so in this case, I don't think we can go say that Sheba is in any way foreshadowing Christ, but rather it's just as a very practical thing. The kingdom and the people's lives are saved by the death of the one man. And now we find Joab returns to Jerusalem to the king. No mention of Abishai at all. So in the process, Joab has managed to reassert himself at the head of the army, and he acts as he has done before, competently, decisively, ruthlessly, and gets results. And hence, when we now hear of the reorganization or the re-establishment of David's administration, we find that Joab is there. So verses 23 to the end read, now Joab was in command of all the army of Israel, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada was in command of the Cherethites and the Pelethites. And Adoram was in charge of the forced labor, and Jehoshaphat the son of Ahilud was the recorder, and Sheva was secretary, and Zadok and Abiathar were priests, and Ira the Jairite was also David's priest. And so we now have this re-establishment of David's administration, and Joab is back exactly where he started off, at the head of the army, command of all the army of Israel. And then we have Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, we've heard of him before, is in charge of the Cherethites, the mercenary army. So we've got Israel's army and we've got the mercenaries as two separate units, and one is in charge of one, the other in charge of the other.
It says forced labor, so they forced people into the army then?
Not army, forced labor. So this would be the land army, if you like. So the forced labor was a very common phenomenon in these in this sort of pre-modern times where government administration and taxation was not very carefully organized. There wasn't a very careful bureaucracy, and so the way that public works would be done would be that people would be forced. It's a sort of in lieu of taxation. Instead of paying tax, you'd be forced to work in public works for a certain amount of time. Now, what the forced labor was being used for, we're not told, but of course we do know that when Solomon takes to the throne, there are some massive public building works. So this may be David begin to prepare the building of the temple by his son, which we know that he does make extensive preparations, so that by the time Solomon comes to the throne, all these, there's already.
Solomon must have been the third son then down. There's already two gone.
Well, that's it. Well, if you want to find out who's who, you could read the lists. 2 kings, beginning of 2 kings. But the point is that by the time Solomon takes to the throne, and there are all these public works that are being done, and much of the preparation has already been done for him by David. He doesn't build himself, but he, you can read Book of Chronicles, for example. David spends. He establishes all the kind of the various temple service servants, Levites, priests, and so on. They're all organized so that when the temple is built, it's ready to go. And we have Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was the recorder. Is like the kind of head of the civil service, if you like. Sheva, the secretary, and then we've got the priests, including a new name, Ira the Jailer. So there's an additional. Doesn't mean they're the only priests, but they were if you like, there's chief priests and the kind of the head of the priesthood, and the third man is there as well. And again, possibly again in preparation for the temple service that will soon.
Do we hear of
Eventually,
Jehoshaphat
with that,
again?
it said that will eventually be established under Solomon, and once the temple is built, the activity, if you like, the temple activity will grow considerably. Your question?
Do we hear about Jehoshaphat again somewhere? Because it's a name that I thought I've read before in the Bible.
Well, he gets mentioned. Jehoshaphat does get mentioned because of his, but not in any detail.
Oh.
Yes. What's missing from this list? There's one group of people that you might expect to be there at the sort of included amongst the leadership of the nation, but aren't. There are no sons of David at all in any position at all. So the whole thing has been run. David's king, and the whole thing has been run by other people outside his family. So none of his sons has any kind of position of power or authority.
Perhaps he thought he'd lost enough sons.
At this point, well, none of this job, apart from Job's job, none of this is dangerous. There's no danger in being secretary, but perhaps he's wanting to keep his sons at an arm's length from power. He's already had 2 sons behave very foolish. Who knows? And that brings us to the end of that chapter. And this is also the end of the whole long section that began in chapter 11 of David's trials and tribulations, which he had brought upon himself. And we are now beginning to draw near to the end of the book. We have finally, we have one more set of action in chapter 21, which we'll look at next week, David's reaction to it. And then we come to we have just after that only 2 chapters left. David makes one more big mistake, but that's separate entirely from what's happened so far. Any final thought? We've got a couple of minutes left. Are there any sort of reflections or questions? By any-
Actually, I would like to ask one question. Is the 26th verse where say about this new pastor or priest, yes, priest. I have to get the English Bible. So is it mentioned separately just because he is not actually from a Levite, or what he should, so that he is like from an outsider? When it says that, what are these Jairites?
Yes, the Jairite, yeah. It's unlikely. Again, we don't know very much at all about Ira the Jairite. There's a mention, but obviously being a Jairite doesn't mean that it's not a separate tribe. That's a clan name. So you've got the Israelis divided into 12 tribes originally. Some of them merge over time. Some of the smaller tribes get merged, like Simeon kind of merges into Judah. But then within those tribes, you have clans, which are like extended family groupings. And so being a Bikrite or being a Jairite is to be a member of that clan. And so it's more likely that he is a Levite priest, because the priests were to be from the tribe of Levi, but he comes from that particular clan of Levi. He's mentioned here. I mean, it's more likely that he's brought in. It's simply he's somebody who is appointed to this kind of prominent position alongside Zadok and Abiathar at this point, because of some sort of extension or expansion of the active priesthood. But it's difficult to know exactly because we're not told. Any other questions or reflections?
Just a reflection. Just at the tail end, we see these names. They've all got top jobs in government and I guess Judaism. But I just like the fact that is this woman that we've heard about twice. It says, the Lord kind of writes it down that she was a woman of wisdom. She's a nameless woman. So it's encouragement to us, whether we're men or women, that we can remain nameless, and we may not be in top authority with fancy titles or letters after our name. But I think if I had a choice between being a recorder or being a scribe or having wisdom, I think with reflection of life, I would dearly love wisdom. Good for you.
And so you should. I think wisdom is something that is tragically underrated. It's the thing. It's if you like, the quality that the Bible extols in people, and that we are urged to. We've got a whole book of Proverbs, which is all about, it's about the one thing that we need is wisdom. And we value and prize all sorts of things in life, whether it's success or wealth or happiness or some such thing. These are things, intelligence or academic success or sporting prowess or whatever it is, all these sorts of things. And all along, the thing that we actually need is wisdom.
Because you don't have to be intelligent to have wisdom.
Yeah, you don't. Although wisdom and being intelligent is no good if you're not wise with it. And you can have wisdom comes from all sorts of different places, and you can have wisdom, you can have wealth without wisdom, and wisdom without wealth, and you can sort of make that pairing with anything else. But wisdom is which is when you know how to act rightly, how to have the right words. I mean, we all know people who are wise in their words, who know what to say in their right, and know when not to say anything. And there's so much, and I think our culture is again currently is plagued by superficiality. We like to be entertained. Entertainment is a massive industry. Billions and billions of pounds every year being spent to entertain people in a way that leaves no mark on anybody's character, but that in itself, we kind of did, and it is shapes us in a particular way. And it is one thing that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And the moment we give up on that, but even the pagan Greeks, the Romans, they knew the value of wisdom, and they invested in it. They were pagans. They didn't have the value. They lacked the fear of God, but they understood enough to know that wisdom is something that needs to be cultivated, and it's a kind of the tragedy of our era that we've given up on that, and we have this very, very shallow understanding of what is useful in, for example, in a child's education. We want schools to produce useful members of the economy. It's essentially what we've got to, so that people can have a good job, and we neglect this weighty. So yeah, you pressed my buttons there very successfully, David.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Good. Let's close this. We've come to 3 o'clock, so let's close with prayer. Father, we thank you for the wisdom that comes from your word, and we thank you that you instruct us both through the example of saints who have gone before us, and also the warning example of those who have erred. That you've recorded also the failures of people so that we might recognize and turn away from sin and disobedience. We pray that you would grant us wisdom through a right fear and knowledge of you, and that you would give us the power and wisdom of the Holy Spirit to follow Jesus by faith, trusting in all that he has done for us, and emulating and imitating his perfect and holy example, that our lives would bring glory to you, benefit to our neighbour, and that we would be established in a true and living faith. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with us all. Amen.
Amen.